Okay, it looks like we've got a majority of the attendees on, and so I appreciate everyone taking a little bit of time this afternoon. Hello to all the attendees. Thank you for joining the Airstream webinar today. This is our first webinar since 2021. I thought this would be a great starting point considering the data we're monitoring, managing across our customer base, and more importantly, what we're seeing in terms of how the supply chains are operating now in this new supply chain environment. The future, which we think here at Airstream is here, is all about digitizing the supply chain. We see this every day with more sense of urgency now because of what did change in 2021 and how the world changed and supply chain teams changed. We're all doing more with less. Information is king, and being able to leverage that information is ultimately going to determine how quickly companies can adapt to that future crisis or new market opportunities. Here at Airstream, we have always built our thesis on you need fast data and accurate information to run a supply chain. I'm Jeff Dorr, president of Airstream, and again, I just want to thank all of our customers and partners who leverage our platform and engage with it every day. And we're happy to continue to provide thought leadership and learnings for all we do. So thank you for the attendees and for those of you that might be new to Airstream. We keep this pretty casual. We've got an exciting lineup of folks today that are going to speak with us. And so with that, we're going to get right to it. I do know that we took some questions prior to the webinar, so I'm going to ask some of those as we move through the panel today, but also feel free to submit those questions as we go along, and they'll be forwarded to me, and I'll get to those and insert them where I can. The agenda slide here, we're going to just go over quick introductions. We'll have our lead economist give a market update, and then the panel will come online, and I'm excited about what we're going to hear from them today. These are very informational. Last year, I think we had, I want to say, close to 4 or 5 different webinars with over 1,000 attendees. So we appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy day to do this. And again, hopefully you'll walk away with some really important things to think about for the future. I always look at this as, when I actually attend webinars myself, I usually have 3 questions. Am I in the same boat as these panelists? Am I looking at my supply chain or technology the right way? Are there opportunities to change or improve? 2, what are people doing differently or the same? And 3, can I actually learn something new today? And so I'm hoping that everybody that's on today is going to get a chance to walk away with answers to at least one of those questions. Next slide, please. Airstream, just for those of you that may not know us, we're a platform technology in the food service industry providing normalized and enhanced data to our partners so that they can make proactive decisions, regarding various aspects of their supply chain. Our user teams include QA departments, supply chain, promotions, purchasing, distribution, marketing, and sales. And they include suppliers, operators, and distributors. A little bit about our network. We have over 250 brands that are comprised of over 400 concepts. We have over 1,000 data points within the supply chain, and that is connected to distributors and suppliers. And then I think we're nearing close to 8,500 suppliers that are now collaborating through our network. Next slide, Kate. Thank you. So the panelists, and they'll be joining us here in a few minutes, but our panelists today are Megan Shearer, Senior Manager of Shake Shack. We have Debbie Pollei, Vice President of Supply Chain Coffee Bagel Brands. We have Rick Butner, the Senior Director of Supply Chain Operations for IPC Subway. And again, they'll be joining us shortly after our market update. So next, I want to introduce Dr. Isaac Olvera. Isaac is our Airstream's lead economist. He's been with us for over 2 years now, works closely with all of our customers in forecasting commodity trends. He's been a great asset to us. A couple of years ago, some of you may know, we acquired American Restaurant Association. Isaac came over from that, so he's got a ton of experience working with hundreds and hundreds of brands. So very excited to have Isaac talk today. So Isaac, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Jeff. As Jeff noted, my name is Isaac Olvera. I've been with Airstream about 2.5 years now. The big thing that I spend the majority of my day doing is looking at the commodity markets, developing forward-looking insights, and really trying to figure out how changes and emerging trends are going to impact operations, especially on all sides. I think one of the biggest things that we have been seeing in those operational changes is leaner supply chains and leaner teams, as Jeff alluded to earlier. The next slide. the industry is really doing more with less. In that post-COVID era, one of the things that we saw was obviously a closure of restaurants and declining sales. But as the adjustments were made moving forward, we actually moved back to record revenue per employee in the restaurant industry, which is interesting, is the fact that we were having to do more with less, kind of the theme there. Granted, as COVID reemerged, we started seeing increasing cases into late 2020. One of the things that we did see is declining revenues, but we're back at that increase there. So one of the big things that we're looking at is, how do we do more with less? How do we allow the data to do the heavy lifting for us? And we want to utilize that digital supply chain in order to allow that data to do some of the work for us, especially as restaurants start to reopen. The next slide, one of the things that we'll see is that restaurant reopenings haven't really been standardized across the board. So this is our top 5 restaurant states by sales. On the bottom, they're just outlined by alphabetical order. One of the big things that we can see is California, New York, Illinois have all really operated in very in higher COVID restriction environments. Florida and Texas, on the other hand, have not. So we can see that Florida and Texas have had more restaurant seating, more restaurant diners, according to the Open Table Network data. And one of the things that we're seeing, obviously, is how weather impacted Texas over these last couple of weeks. But I really want to highlight on this chart is just the fact that I have TSA traveler screenings, or those airline passengers that move through a TSA checkpoint. When you check it against all the different states, it doesn't really align very well with any of them except for Florida. There's about an 80% correlation between traveler screenings and restaurant seatings in the state of Florida. In economics and statistics, they always say correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation. That's certainly true. But in this case, we're definitely looking at the fact that as leisure travel picks up, as we're seeing more people being screened, we do expect restaurant reopenings or restaurant seatings to begin to increase. But on the next slide, we'll see that it hasn't really been even across the board. So looking at grocery store sales versus food service sales, the food dollar has shifted. In the pre-COVID era, we were really seeing food service on a year-over-year basis increasing, and kind of that grocery store sales were much more stagnant, increasing mostly par to 1 to 3%. But obviously in that post-COVID era, we saw that the way that consumers were spending their food dollars changing. And there was again a setback in late 2020, but the expectation is as we move forward, we will begin to see this pent-up consumer demand coming back. So when we look at the next slide, the big thing that we're going to see is that not all restaurants, though, have been operating in the same way. These full service segment restaurants, so generally where we go to, we sit down, we order and we pay after we eat, that full service segment is still operating down somewhere in the area of about 20 to 30%, whereas limited service, or where we approach a counter, we order food and we pay at the counter and we either take it and sit or we leave, that's actually been running par to up 10%. So that pent-up demand that we're talking about isn't necessarily the same across the board. The next slide, we'll look at the fact that where is that food demand, kind of that pent-up demand, where is the most at-risk category across the commodities? So looking at this chart here, there's a breakdown of food at home versus food away from home, and the food away from home is broken down by segment. So ERS, Economic Research Service, has broken it down by segment, and the biggest thing that we can really see is items like beef, chicken, cheese, or eggs all have a relatively high use at both restaurant as well as food service in aggregate. So if you start to look at where the biggest risk items might be, so we can start to pinpoint some of these areas. The next slide, we have kind of just a general description of how this may look. And the big thing that we're seeing is, at the risk of oversimplification, the restaurant and food service only sales of beef accounted for about 31.6% of the beef that we consume as consumers. If we use that 20% reduction in sales across the board, and we assume that impacts beef at 20% as well, that means we're missing somewhere in the area of about 6% of food dollars allocated to beef. and that obviously puts some risk to the upside of what we need to backfill or buy on the beef segment. Now, granted, all of that is not necessarily going to come in at once, but if you look at this, the next level, the volatility of the commodities, the expectation is that there's going to be quite a bit of this whipsaw or bullwhip effect as restaurants come back online. Last year in 2020, we saw higher highs and lower lows pretty much throughout the entire year, especially relative to the medium-term average, that 3-year average. But the big thing in 2021 is as we're starting to bring restaurants back online, as we're starting to see more of a fight between retail or grocery stores and food service establishments as we open back up, commodity prices are going to remain relatively volatile. That's something we're going to have to continue to watch. And it's not just across proteins, beef, pork, chicken, or the grains and oil seeds. It's really across the board. There's a lot going on here. So just kind of to summarize everything we went over there, the big thing is regional variations are likely to remain. The expectation is that that's going to be a continuation moving forward. We're going to have to utilize a digital supply chain and that near real-time and accurate data in order to continue to monitor what we have and how it's moving, and also to accommodate this changing consumer buying habits or buying trends and eating habits. The supply chain visibility and partner collaboration remains key, especially as these commodity prices increase. We're going to start seeing things like stockouts or substitutions that we need to make sure that we keep track of. And the last one is how do we manage the commodity movement, the buying bulls, and the bullwhip effect moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Great. Thanks, Isaac. Appreciate that. So a couple more things, and then we're going to hop over to the panel. So, I always look at, what does this mean for me and our brands? And when I say brand, it's not just brand, it's supplier, it's distributor, because we're all in this together in collaboration. So we're always thinking about how do we help our customers beyond providing that cleansed data and near-time real analytics. It's about how do we operate a supply chain? How do we think about the new things that are happening within the supply chain, and how can we use tools or information to render data more quickly, easily, so that all parties can benefit within that. So, that's really what we continuously think about with our customers and align with them on as they go through different cycles in their supply chain. The platform slide, just to ground some folks who may not be familiar with what AirStream does. The customers you see today, as well as many others, they're sitting on top of an industry platform that we have built. This platform provides collaboration between brands and concepts, GPOs, distributors, and suppliers. And within each, it has modules that connect the entire supply chain with those critical pieces of data that each party depends on daily. It really comes down to that single source of truth that enables that collaboration. Next slide, Kate. Our own trends that we see beyond what Isaac looks at is we actually baseline and trend usage of our technology. So if you see here, these are various tiles within our portfolio that all of our customers use. And we're always baselining and trending that, looking for the ways customers use it. As you would probably imagine, in spring of 2020, as most of you know, inventory became the #1 priority in the first 3 months, right, starting in the shutdown. And I'd say we started to see that trend probably mid-March. And beyond just wanting to know where the inventory was, it was really thinking forward about how do I pull this inventory every day? How do I look at it from a dashboard perspective? How do I push that upstream to my distributors and suppliers so that we're all aligned to understand how do we better manage that? As you can see by the statistic here, we had a 51% increase in our inventory tile alone based on our users. In the fall of 2020, we started to see that starting to flatten out a little bit, right? People were getting more into the routine of trying to normalize my supply chain back into some semblance of what it might have been in 19, and understand really the effects of our decisions as partners, not just us, but how are our distributors and suppliers affected by some of these decisions and consumer and customer trends. Today, what we're seeing is trying to figure out what are those variables going to look like in the next year or two. And that is truly what we're talking to our customers about, is not just how we're managing it today, because as you would expect, look, inventory and freight visibility is still top of mind. I would say that freight visibility and inventory are our #1 hit tile at this point. I think customers start their days in it. Certainly the panelists can talk to that. I think spend analytics and quality management, I don't think anybody wants to lose sight of that. So again, the way we've built the application is around the way the supply chain operates. But what's interesting now is that a lot of products have come into the market, new products, existing products, substitution of products. And so now what we're seeing is trends around, what does my non-contract spend look like? How do I get back to a spec? Or a lot of customers, I think, are asking, do I really even need a spec for certain products now in this new environment? And then collaboration with our suppliers. Supplier inventory, I would say, is probably the number one topic that's been brought up to us over the last 6 months. Probably two different things. Can you connect our POS system? And can you guys pull supplier inventory and production schedules for us? And we're doing that. So excited to, again, move over to the panel and let you hear it from, the true operators that are working in the supply chain every day. Definitely honored to have them participate again. Megan, Debbie, and Rick, if you guys would please come on now. And what I'd like to do is the panelists start to join is, I think it's always great to just get an understanding of your business, how your teams operate in today's environment, and anything else you'd want to share, about your brand, feel free to do so. So Megan, why don't we start with you, and then we'll roll over to Debbie, and then follow up with Rick, and then we'll start moving into some of the audience questions.
Hi, I'm Megan Scherer. I'm the Senior Supply Chain Manager at Shake Shack. I've been with the company for about 5.5 years. Throughout my tenure, I've seen the company grow from 40 locations domestically to today we have 186 corporate domestic owned locations, service out of 20 warehouses. So definitely a fast-paced environment that we are in. So COVID has especially been challenging for us, managing inventory across 20 warehouses and across so many locations. And our team is very lean, as many other supply chain teams are. We run with 4 people on our team.
Thank you, Megan. Debbie?
Yeah, I'm Debbie Pollei. I'm the Vice President of Supply Chain at Bagel Brands. We have 4 different brands that we manage in supply chain. We have Einstein Bagels, which is national, Brugger's, which is kind of more regional. They are located more in the upper Midwest, the Northeast, the Southeast, and some locations in California and Arizona. We also have Noah's Bagels, which is in California. And then our Manhattan Bagel Group, which is out of Pennsylvania and New Jersey primarily. I operate with 12 employees total in supply chain. We have right around 1,100 stores that we manage with company. We have franchisees and then licensees that are primarily on college campuses, hospitals, and in the military bases as well. So, and just a fun fact for us, tomorrow we're launching probably our best LTO sandwich that we've ever launched. It's a brisket sandwich, a Texas egg sandwich brisket. And so I would encourage everybody to stop by a Brugger's and or Einstein location and give it a try.
Love it. Thank you, Debbie. Appreciate that.
Okay, for me, IPC and Subway, we have about 24,000 restaurants currently, US, Canada, and Puerto Rico. That is North America. IPC focuses on North America, but we do pull product. We either pull product or supply product to every continent in the world, with the exception of Antarctica. And like Debbie, we have locations in just about anything you can think of, from sports stadiums, which hasn't been very profitable this past year, to colleges, universities, hospitals, Walmarts, you name it. We're in just about every type of facility you can think of. And yeah, the complexity for us is just getting this product moving either in through ports or out through ports is really, really tough for us. And to understand when product's going to be able to hit our restaurants can be challenging. But that's why we do what we do. We have about 60 people total in our supply chain organization, including, for me, supply chain operations, which supports the supply chain for data analytics and operating systems, product traceability, things of that nature. We have 11 people in my department.
Thanks, Rick. No, that's great. That's a great swath. And what I love about this panel is, it's great from Megan. Again, I remember when we started with you guys and you had 40 units. So it's very cool to see that. And Rick, I actually remember when we started with you, 13,000 units. So we've seen lots of variations as everybody's grown. So, and Debbie, you've grown from, I think, one brand to multiple brands. So really a nice picture that you guys paint in terms of how you're managing very, very different supply chains. So Kate, next slide, please. So we're going to just anchor on a few slides here and some trend things that we see. And then what we did is we tied customer questions or attendee questions to those. So I will thread those through the next few slides. And then at the end, we'll wrap up and certainly open up just questions for the panelists themselves if there's anything specific that we didn't cover. So, for us, look, we've seen, 2020 was an interesting year for a lot of folks. I would say that not surprising, right? We saw a uptick in across the board with our technology. We saw a 36% increase across all of our chain customers in terms of using a platform. And a lot of that was due, if you think about it, and again, I won't speak for these teams specifically, but we know that the amount of access that we turned on for our existing customers certainly created some of that. So all of a sudden we had a lot more executives that wanted access to certain dashboards. We needed people that were maybe tangentially working with promotion groups or inventory groups or supply chain groups needing more access to data. And when the offices last year started shutting down, I believe still quite a few are still shut down, we would have expected that trend to go up. So it was really interesting to see, certainly positive from our perspective, that the collaboration really started to take place. And then I would say also from the distributor and the supplier component, we've got some metrics later that we'll show you in terms of how much that also increased usage on our platform. And so for us, we look at those micro trends. Where are people thinking about not just running their supply chain, but ultimately it always comes back to, I need faster data that gives me really good information. And those are two very different things, and that's how we look at it. So let's just pick out some questions here. I've got about 10. I think we'll maybe get to a couple, but I'll scroll through these as we're answering. But one of the questions that was pretty consistent that we received was, what is your organization, as it ties back to what Isaac was talking about, and in terms of consumer activity and how that's impacting your supply chain? I think that, Debbie, I know we talked about it over the last few weeks about the variabilities in markets. I live in Florida. We all know Florida is crazy town down here. So, we haven't really been feeling the effects. But I know that, there are a lot of other states that are, although it looks like some of them are opening back up. So maybe we just start there. Debbie, I'd love to hear that since you're based out of Denver. You've seen some real wild swings and variability. So can you just tell us a little bit about how consumer activity is impacting your supply chain and how are you guys managing towards that?
Yeah, so we definitely are seeing swings in certain regional areas. Again, Texas, Florida, Arizona, some of those places, we're seeing, positive sales from that perspective. But you go up into the Ohio, Michigan area, and we are down, quite a bit. So I think it just depends on, kind of the government mandates on how the states are actually handling the COVID cases and how much they're open. One of the things that that my team does is that we have 3 distribution coordinators that on a daily basis, and they have been doing this since before COVID. So I think that's why when COVID hit, we were able to quickly ramp down inventory. But we definitely pay attention to the distribution inventory on a daily basis as to how the stores are pulling. That has definitely helped us in order to manage accordingly so that we don't have dead inventory at the distributor, but we also have adequate inventory to fulfill our needs at the store level. So it's one of those things that we're still on that ride as the country starts to open back up with more vaccines. I think more states are starting to lift the mandates, and a lot are at 50% now, even up to 75% in some cases. And of course, we all know Florida's stayed open, pretty much the whole time. But We definitely are taking a strong look at that. We also are pretty much looking on a daily, I would say not daily, but very often, and that time frame is fluid. Last week I think we had certain dates in mind that we were looking to open dining rooms, and this week that date has kind of moved up. But it all depends on how the vaccine goes. You've got consumers out there that are antsy. We've got customers that call certain stores every day to see if our dining room is open, and we have other customers that are like, if you open your dining rooms, we probably won't be coming in. So you kind of have to juggle all consumers and to make sure that you're meeting the needs. Right now we've chosen to keep our dining room closed for the most part, and we are relying a lot on the technical aspect of the platform with order ahead, as well as DoorDash. And as of last week, that's about 20% of our overall business. So we've definitely pivoted quickly to that whenever COVID hit. But just managing it on a daily basis has definitely been challenging. But we are in Aerostream every morning. The DC coordinators probably spend at least 2 to 3 hours just looking at inventory from each DC.
Sure. That's great, Thank you for that. So, Megan, I know that we had talked a little bit about some of the promotions you guys are doing, and you were talking about how you have lines of people standing in the cold to get some burgers. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about what you're seeing from your consumers. Obviously, New York has, been certainly an interesting zone up there in terms of how people are coming back. But would love to hear from you on consumer activity and how it's impacting your supply chain and how you guys are thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Debbie said, we saw a huge shift over to digital platforms, delivery, and order ahead on our app. It's definitely been hard for us in Manhattan. That's pretty much the base of our locations are in that metropolitan area, which have been obviously hit the hardest. What we've seen is there's been a huge shift into more of the suburban areas. So a lot of our suburban shacks, specifically in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, are doing pretty well. It's interesting to see that shift from that metropolitan area to the more suburban areas. I mean, our theory is kind of that people aren't going in and traveling into the city for work, so they're staying at home and they're closer to those suburban areas that we have our locations at. And it's definitely been interesting to see as we've started to reopen. We started back up on new store openings, so a lot of those suburban areas. I mean, we just opened a location in Nanuet, New York. And that's in a very suburban area, and to see the lines outside of people waiting for their burgers, even in COVID times and 20-degree weather, is interesting and definitely encouraging to what we have to look forward to in 2021. But it's definitely been interesting to see that shift into more of the delivery and the order ahead, and how we're managing through especially our takeout and delivery packaging, and how we're sourcing bags and how we're sourcing our clamshells. So definitely a shift that we're trying to mitigate and watch and get ahead of by leveraging Aerostream and using that data to get ahead of inventory at the opcos. We've been lucky enough to be able to hire somebody full time a couple of months ago during COVID to mainly focus on that inventory alerts tile and making sure that we're staying ahead of all of the inventory at the different distributors. We're in 20 warehouses, so to keep tabs on it is a bit challenging and a job in itself. And in addition to that, we've even set up 15-minute calls with our distributors once a week just to make sure that we're ahead and we're getting ahead of any potential issues as sales start to ramp back up over the next couple of months.
Sure. Have you seen, and I'm curious just on using information in general, are you using any information in your supply chain differently, or are you just looking at it maybe from a different lens?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking at it in a different lens as we see different shifts to, for example, ketchup, where we were using gallon ketchup, we're seeing a shift into PCs. We want to get everything in prepackaged. Same with like our cutlery, where we switched to individually wrapped cutlery. So being able to use ArrowStream and leverage that inventory alerts tile, and also to just be able to have that visibility into the different DCs and making sure that they're bringing in the appropriate amount of PC ketchup, PC mustard for us, all of those newer items that we hadn't used heavily previously has been a huge help for us to manage that and make sure that we're ahead and we have the inventory available for our shacks to pull from.
Interesting. Nope, that's great. Great for that. Thank you for that. And then Rick, I'll follow up with you. I know IPC you guys are a massive data user. So, any interesting trends from consumer activity, or to follow up on Megan's, the question I just asked Megan, how are you looking at information differently, or through a different lens at this point, with all the activity you guys have going on?
Yeah, sure. For consumer activity, it's been all over the place. I think that's kind of what Debbie was saying. We deal with, huge increases in an area 1 week, and then next week it's down again. We've even dealt with things like in Canada, where entire provinces will just shut down overnight. And we have a DC sitting on a warehouse full of inventory. We have to figure out how long is this going to last. We need to pull inventory out of those warehouses. What's this mean for production facilities we have in those provinces? So inventory has been our focus. We have to know where everything is. We just cannot survive otherwise. It can take such big swings in a short amount of time, and we have to be reactive to that, and all the way up to our suppliers knowing what they're able to produce, because a lot of our supplier partners, they have limited production, especially coming out of COVID. They weren't putting as many people on a production line in a plant, so there wasn't as much product to feed our system. Do we have enough to go around? When's the business going to come back? So those are a lot of the questions that we've had to really rely on our inventory and basically all of our data a lot more than we ever have. And people are looking at inventory shipments, looking at POs, looking at trucks, whether they're delayed. Like this past week through Texas, that was a nightmare trying to get anything moving across the country. It seemed like everything moved through Texas when they had all the snowstorms. So it's really been key for us to lean on the data and really rely on the data, and having clean, accurate data has been our focus for 2021.
Sure. No, that's great. It's always good to know, right? Because I know that we've worked together on and off for 20 years, and so it's interesting to see those shifts and how people leverage data. And just when you think you're leveraging it just the right amount, you figure out ways to leverage it more. And certainly that's what we try to stay in front of, right? And how do we really think ahead? Because what we see, and I think we've got several customers that we went through this years ago. If you remember back from 2014, when the ice storm started shutting down everything, it really just manifested itself again, right, just recently in Texas. And so, we see that trending certainly through our data that goes back for years and years and years. And it looks like that's something that is being consistent, whether it's the wildfires out in California, whether it's the hurricanes down here in Florida, or the snowstorms or the ice storms that are happening in Texas. So it is interesting to see those trends. And that's a good lead into this, this next background. And we've talked a lot about inventory here. Some of the things, and so I think inventory is a component of it. But it also, we have a lot of distributors and suppliers that are on this call today, and I always like to make sure that we're looping those partners in, because you folks also participate on our platform. And this is an example, and we love to show real-time examples of how our customers are leveraging things. And as Isaac and David Maloney talk about commodities and consumer trends, I think the one thing that we are seeing is that at some point, I know the panelists we've all talked about, is that there is going to be a market grab when the pent up demand breaks free, whether it's through the vaccine, 75% of the vaccinations are done, whatever the case might be, that 20%, 30%, we've talked to some of our distributor partners. They're all trying to figure out how do we anticipate that growth, because everybody's going to be growing for product. They're going to be trying to get it shipped. We all know that we're operating with less folks, both out of the distributor centers, the suppliers, as well as the operators. And so how do we provide that forecast and visibility as we move forward? Some of the things that we saw that was really interesting is, as we had 3 customers that came to us and said, look, we've got 20% week over week growth, Debbie, to your point, as the restaurants start to reopen. And so we need to start modeling out products to push out to our distribution team and to our distributors and suppliers every day to say, look, this is what we think is going to happen, and we need to anticipate this. And it also obviously helps the stores. The example here is the 32 cup ounce. If you look at that bottom screen there, we had a customer that was part of a promotion. They had a 32 cup ounce that had enough on hand at the time through the next purchase order, but with expecting a 20% lift in sales, that second purchase order was going to come out too late and they were going to run out of stock. And I know we've seen this with bags, and we've got some other stories about bags that'll manifest itself here a little bit later. But the report showed that they needed to bump this future order, right, from the scheduled delivery from the 22nd to the 18th. And we actually turned around and took this dashboard and made it an option for all of our customers to leverage this. And they could start using this with, different products that they want to build up. They could do incremental order increases, build safety stocks in advance, and send things like this out there to distributors. Megan, I know you said that you folks are doing this. In the lines of that, I think, we're all trying to move past the pandemic, but it certainly was, it set kind of a baseline on how we think about it. So I'm curious, how were your suppliers or distributors impacted in ways that maybe changed your product lines? And to me, some of it's around SKU rationalization, maybe some of it's around how you're doing more promotions. So I'm curious, if you've got suppliers that no longer, Rick, to your point, are producing, or they're producing in a limited production cycles, distributors are no longer maybe carrying some of the proprietary items. Megan, how are you guys managing through that, or have you been able to stabilize some of that?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, really communication has been the biggest key for us, and communicating and over communicating with our suppliers and our distributors. At the end of every year, we do updated projections for our suppliers. This year, we decided we're going to continue to send updates pretty much like on a 6 to 8 week basis to our core suppliers to make sure that we're updating them as we get more updates on what our sales are going to look like, how we're seeing the trend in certain regions. Obviously, as we've touched on during this call, that each region has had significantly different highs and lows depending on which region you're looking at. So definitely from our perspective, communication has been key, and keeping a good relationship with our suppliers. I always joke around that I have suppliers that text me, they call me constantly. I am very much a type of person, I'd rather hear if there's an issue coming up, I want them to text me and I want them to call me. So I try to make them feel as comfortable as possible to be able to do that. So our suppliers have been really great in communicating if there are any issues and disruptions in production because of COVID cases going up at their production facilities. So we've been able to get ahead, and definitely having dual suppliers for certain items has helped us. And we haven't luckily been caught in a position where we've run out of an item because of our over communication with our suppliers.
That's great. No, that's a great story. And then Debbie, I know you did a panel with us last year with one of your distributors, and you guys were really being proactive, and that distributor was working with you. Anything, since then? I mean, it's we're 9 months later. We're all pros at trying to manage through these interesting times. So anything new from your end or changes in those last 9 months that you would do differently, or that have changed the way you guys are operating with your supplier and distributor?
No, I think, to be honest with you, Megan hit the nail on the head, because communication is the number one, and you got to stay in communication with your distributors as well as the suppliers on what your business is doing. we receive a daily flash report that tells us what our sales did the prior day. And we obviously are always looking for trends in supply chain to try to manage through that. We were also very heavy in catering. Our business was in general. With offices still being shut down, that business has not come back. And as we start to see that business come back, obviously, you know, we'll need to be in good communication in regards to that. But we really have kind of hit a little bit of a plateau as to where we are, you know, overall with our business. We see better business on the weekends. You know, Monday through Friday, we see, you know, our business is down somewhat. A lot of that is attributed to the, you know, the catering piece to it. But being in constant communication with our suppliers and our distributors has been key. And, but that was, I will have to say, that was something that the team did prior to COVID. We just kind of upped our game a little bit more, you know, during that. And, you know, having the tool with the inventory management out of AeroStream has just been a lifesaver for us. I know some supply chains that have do not have access to AeroStream, and the amount of write-off that they ended up having, you know, through COVID has been, you know, astronomical as compared to, I think, a lot of us that actually utilize AeroStream. We were able to jump on that relatively quickly and minimize any kind of, you know, a lot of financial risk as compared to others. So, you know, grateful that we have that tool and that we're able to utilize it to the fullest.
Oh, and you're such a good advocate for us, and we always appreciate that. I think what was interesting for the attendees and for those that may not be AirStream customers, we obviously know a lot of folks that are still out in the supply chain that aren't customers. And during the pandemic, we had a lot of people reaching out to us asking, could they leverage our supplier discovery tool, because they knew we had 9,000 suppliers, I think, in the network. And so I think that was really interesting. Is it wasn't even about getting the information as fast, but it was also just the breadth of information that people didn't have insight into, right? So I think for us, that was an interesting learning about, are there ways to help, you know, even non-AirStream customers kind of as one-offs, right? And so we saw a lot of that happening where they were wanting to say, can you tell me your top 200 bag suppliers, for example? So, and I think we've got an example of that. So, you know, Rick, on your side, I'm curious, you know, substitutions, you guys have a vast distributor network. We heard from a lot of customers that said, look, we were just most concerned about getting product in the door, right? And making sure that we didn't have obsolete products. So I think there was a big shift to substitution products, which was kudos to the suppliers and distributors that could to manage that for our customers, because again, we heard that went off pretty well. But, you know, give us a sense on, you know, how that's impacted IPC. Has that changed the way you guys are thinking about some of your gold standard or core products? And, you know, how's that affected your supplier and distributor channels?
Yeah, it has impacted the way we think about our products. You know, the core products, we're probably, you know, not going to allow the substitutions for unless we absolutely have to. But you know, we allowed substitutions for a lot of products that I never thought we'd allow substitutions for, to be honest with you. We've also used this as an opportunity to revisit our views on using vendor branded products, so that we can free up a SKU from our distributors. One less SKU for them to manage is always welcome to them. So we're going more to, you know, vendor branded products or distributor branded products, which is going to pay dividends for us down the line. And that's really been the biggest change. Before COVID, we had already begun a SKU rationalization. It just really, we kind of sped up that process during COVID so we could get a lot of items out of our system that we really viewed as not necessary at all. But just one other thing too, I mean, I believe we spoke about it a little bit, was how it changed ordering patterns. For us, your example of the 32-ounce cup, you know, our usage went way down because most of our business was either takeout or curbside pickup, and that didn't include fountain drinks. might have included some bottled beverages, but it wasn't, fountain drinks just dropped off the face of the earth for the most part. Starting to come back now, which is great to see, but those are the things that you don't think about when you first go into a situation like that. So having the early warning and seeing things change by monitoring your inventory and communicating with your suppliers just pays huge dividends. You have to be able to do that.
Sure. No, that's great. That's a great lead into this next. And we've got just two more areas to cover. And then I've got some general questions that have been coming through that we'll just fire away at you guys. So if you think about talking about collaboration with trading partners again, a big part of our platform a few years ago was to build this in. I think all three of your brands are leveraging components of this. As we see supplier reductions, Rick, you just talked about it, unpredictable across product categories, right? Well-known issues around beef and others, milk, certain types of packaging due to the pandemic. Again, we've got some pretty funny stories about, we did have a customer that literally drew a paper bag on a piece of paper and did an RFI on it through our system and said, hey, is there anybody that can provide a paper bag like this? So it seems to, it seems that there is a lot more emphasis on being a little more lenient in terms of discovering new products. So Rick, that was really good to hear how you guys are thinking about that from a vendor and distributor perspective. That's interesting. We saw, and this is that example, right? We had a customer was looking for bags. They went out to 200 suppliers. They cross-referenced it with other products, right, to see, are there other categories that I'm buying in? And then they were able to filter through geographic networks, which we've been able to tie that in for customers, which has been nice. So, the RFI component seems we do see, and if you go back to like where we see the trends, I think sourcing, the way we view sourcing, it started to shut down a little bit last year, and it was more just we're sourcing a lot of different products, but the way our sourcing methodology worked was maybe a little bit different. We are seeing an uptick in a lot of online RFI events now, where customers are wanting to go out and find maybe a secondary supplier, or just other types of options that are out there. So, I'm curious, Megan, one of the questions that came in was around local sourcing. And I know you folks have always done some of that. So I'm curious, maybe this is a good, landing spot for us, in the timing of the pandemic. This was the exact question. Do you feel in the timing of the pandemic, local sourcing is the best practice? That would be from one of the attendees. So I'm just kind of curious as to how you would answer that.
Yeah, so we do, prior to COVID, we did local source a lot of our specialty ingredients. We tried to do special concretes at each location that were unique to them. And then as COVID hit, we needed to, as most people, SKU rationalize, and those items were cut. Part of the big reason that we made that decision is it was really hard for the Shacks to continue to meet minimums at those local suppliers. The business wasn't up enough for them to justify bringing in what that minimum quantity was. And it was, again, another item that they needed to manage, already going through a very difficult time at the Shack and trying to keep up with, less staff and all of those different challenges. For us, that was an easy one that we were able to pull back and reduce those items that they were bringing in from local suppliers. So what we found was really consolidating to certain specific suppliers. So our distributor partners, we really tried to consolidate everything to them, so that way these Shacks didn't have to manage multiple purchase orders across different suppliers. So for us, that was a big change that we saw and a benefit that we saw. Now we're rethinking how we look at those local suppliers and how we still tie them in moving forward in 2021, but in a way that's more suitable for the Shacks and easier for them to manage on an ongoing basis. So that's still something that's being worked on. We don't want to get rid of our local partners, but we do want to think of a better way to integrate them into our supply chain moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Debbie, I'd pose the same question to you again as we think about another question here was asking about how critical was it to have multiple suppliers to manage the changes in your supply chain, right? You don't want to, I think the same goes for strategic or long-time partner suppliers. And to me, those can be local or national. But is there, we see suppliers that have maybe never had access to certain brands, having a little more opportunity now to maybe introduce new products or some type of new line to brands that they had in the past. Or Debbie, is your team thinking in those terms? Are you looking kind of for a multi-supplier strategy at all?
Yeah, so actually before COVID hit, one of our strategic initiatives for 2020 was, the fact that we had a number of single sole source suppliers. And we realized that's a risk in supply chain. And, when COVID hit, we definitely, took a step back to take a look at that. We had to manage through COVID at the onset, but we continue to take a look at expanding our supplier network and not have all our eggs necessarily in one basket. When a plant goes down, if they're unable to produce the product at another plant, as we all know, it causes issues, just in general. And being able to have a backup supplier that is already in your network, I think is a very much of a big positive, and it takes a lot of risk off the table. So I know we are continuing to evolve in that direction. And I think a lot of supply chains are actually taking a look at that, specifically since what we all dealt with, through COVID.
Sure. No, that's great. And that's a great lead into this next one. And Rick, I do have a question for you. So obviously you can see, again, not surprising, we've had a 30% increase in the supplier network just over 2020, right? And I think we're seeing a lot more, Debbie, Megan, what you described, where our customers are bringing new suppliers in. We have new suppliers that are joining the platform so they can reach brands like yourselves. Rick, one of the things that we're doing for Subway IPC is we're pulling inventory and production schedules for 140 of your suppliers. Can you just briefly touch on that? I know there's a lot of chains that want to do that, but it's not something that is necessarily been kind of in their strategy. Can you talk about the benefits of that? Because we have about a half a dozen customers that are doing this now, but you guys by far have the most. Can you just talk about the benefit and how IPC is leveraging this information?
Sure. For us, the supply chain is, end to end. We get a lot of insight looking at DC inventory, but when we added in the supplier inventory, which we did a few years ago, and started really leveraging it and combining it, it helped us get a much better picture of how closely our suppliers are managing their inventory. And when we get to a situation like the pandemic, or when we're discontinuing a product, the last thing in the world you want to hear is, well, we have 2 months worth of inventory. You can't make any changes until you use up the inventory that we have in stock. And so it became very, very important for us. And during the pandemic, we think it really gave us an advantage because we could see immediately that we had to turn off production and tell our plants, we can't make any more product right now because it's not moving out of our distribution centers. But we could monitor very quickly how fast they were using up the inventory that they had once it started moving again. In May, once things started coming alive again, we were able to quickly evaluate our production needs. And to Debbie's point, having multiple suppliers for each item paid huge dividends. So we could look at not just inventory up through one supplier, but across an entire commodity and be able to make adjustments across the entire commodity. And we might switch truckloads of raw material from going to one plant to another so that we could utilize the production capabilities that they had versus the one it was intended to go to in the first place. So we think that managing inventory all the way up through the supplier level is a real benefit for us, and we would encourage everybody to do it because it is something that just provides you more visibility than you really think it will when you first start.
That's great. That's great, Rick. And so for those customers that don't know we're doing this, we are pulling supplier production inventory for multiple brands now. So if you're interested in it, certainly talk to us because as Rick said, and that leads into a question. So we have about 4 minutes left. We have a few questions here that that I'd like to get through, and we can certainly stay over just a few minutes. But one of the questions was, how did data and technology help you through this? I feel like we've answered some of that, but maybe if there's more generalized macro view of how data and technology helped you through this, I'd be curious. And then I've got 5 more quick questions I'd like to ask to make sure we get to those. And anybody can answer that question.
I think we kind of answered that, you know, with everything that we're utilizing, I feel like. So with the DC inventory and
Yep.
you know, throughout the AeroStream.
Great. No, that works for me. I agree. I think that was an answered question. What does an optimized supply chain industry look like? Rick, you described like end-to-end visibility, but what is an optimized? I guess the question is, what does an optimized supply chain industry look like?
Well, to me, it ties into having the right tools to be able to optimize your supply chain. You can't optimize your supply chain without the right tools in place. And that is something that was crystal clear to us throughout this, throughout 2020. And part of the reason why we are looking to implement some additional tools so that we can modernize our data and be able to react even faster and plan even better. I mean, it really comes down to being able to plan better to be able to execute better.
Okay, great. No, that's great. I have another question here. They're kind of rolling in, so I'm reading them as they come in. One of the questions is, maybe Megan and Debbie, I felt like you guys answered this a little bit, but how do we keep bottlenecks to a minimum while keeping costs down as well?
So bottlenecks from a standpoint with the whole supply chain from start to finish, I guess, is that?
I assume that's what the question is, if the attendee wants to send that note back in. But yeah, just the question is, how can we keep bottlenecks to a minimum while keeping costs down? So I'm guessing that's the flex in the supply chain, right? And maybe that has to do with both people and costs of maybe it's either obsolete inventory or, running out of inventory is, the kind of the bullwhip effect of the supply chain.
Well, I think good planning is super key in all of that. If you don't have a plan that you can execute, we sure aren't in the kind of times right now where you can wing it. So having a good plan and being able to execute that, I think, keeps the bottlenecks down.
No, that's perfect. So
to piggyback off of that, I would also say from my standpoint, having the visibility in AeroStream also helps me and gives me the ability to move product from warehouse to warehouse. So if I know sales are really struggling in, let's say, Illinois, I can then, if we're heavy on product there, I can then move product to another region within that distribution network to a region that's doing higher sales. So it gives me that ability to know, okay, they have, a week's worth of product on hand, but this warehouse is struggling right now because sales are really low. I can take some of that product and move it there. So having that flexibility and knowing like exactly where my product is and where I can move it to instantly is a huge benefit. Prior to us having AeroStream, we were working off of our distributors platform, and I can tell you it is definitely much more difficult to have that ability than it is with having the AeroStream system.
Sure. I appreciate that. Thanks, Megan. I know we are right on the hour. There's probably about 4 more questions. I feel like we'd answered most of these. It was, top lessons have you learned? Has supply chain had a bigger priority with your organization? I would actually check that box for all of you and say yes, based on our interactions for sure. So I just want to say thank you, Rick, Megan, Debbie. You guys are always such great advocates, very forward thinking, I think, in how you guys run your supply chains, and just a really good broad example of really interesting customers that do some cool stuff. So we can't thank you guys enough. Megan, any promotions coming up? Debbie got hers out. Any Shake Shack promotions coming up that we need to know about?
So we're currently in Korean fried style chicken. Definitely get it if you can. It has been a huge success, so much of a success that we are running out of supply. We're working on getting some more products back in, so hopefully we can finish out the LTO with enough supply. But definitely check it out at your local Shack.
And Debbie, your promotion starts when?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Oh, yeah, Thursday. There you go. Perfect. Rick, anything from IPC Subway?
We launched protein bowls recently, and that was that's been very successful for us. In fact, one of the items that we're having to monitor closely is the bowls themselves. We're having to move them around from place to place because it's doing so well. So
there you go. Well, great. Well, listen, thank you all, and thank you to all the attendees. We had a little over 100 attendees today, so we really appreciate you taking an hour out of our time. I know you folks are busy. You got to get back to running supply chain. Thank you again for being such great customers. Thank you for all the attendees. Hopefully you walked away with something today, and this we will do some follow-up with everybody. You can get a copy of this webinar at a future date. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.